Hey you, yes you, loyal viewer, I have a question for you. What do you think of when I say the word France? Is it maybe Paris, a city with a monument density per square kilometer almost as large as the density of influencers per square kilometer in LA? Or maybe you think of a man wearing a beret, a striped shirt with a large mustache holding a baguette? Or you could be thinking of the multiple musicians or musical artists that have come from the country. All of these ideas about France, except maybe the last one, are pretty popular images when it comes to French culture. That's because it's how France is presented in a lot of media. Which is why today I will be attempting to answer the timeless question, is France accurately portrayed in mainstream media? And if you're wondering what kind of media, because that's a very broad subject, well, think about it as movies, characters, stage plays, video games, ads, articles, etc. And if you don't have enough time to watch the entire video for some reason, well, the answer to that question is no. It doesn't really represent all of France's diverse culture. But you probably already knew that. So this video is going to be separated into 3 different parts. First, I'm going to be going over some French stereotypes and comparing them to actual facts and see if the stereotypes are still accurate to this day. Next, I'll be talking about Paris and how its portrayal is very important to French culture. And finally, I'm going to be talking quickly about how the internet has a really weird relationship with French culture, especially in recent years. Now that all of that is out of the way, we can finally move on to the first part of the video, stereotypes. Now we all know what a stereotype is, whether it be Americans being morbidly obese and loving burgers, or the British having horrible teeth hygiene. Stereotypes are facts that are somewhat grounded in reality, over-exaggerated to the point of no return. And it's no surprise that France is also home to some of these stereotypes. So now, I'm going to be taking a look at some stereotypes and seeing if they're still relevant today by comparing them to actual facts. Now the first stereotype is that the French have poor hygiene. Now this stereotype apparently originated in World War II from American soldiers when they saw the French. And to be fair, you know, France wasn't really at their best during World War II, and people didn't have access to running water, etc. So it would make sense that they're dirty. But let's compare that to the character Gaëtan the Mole Molière from the 2001 Disney film Atlantis: The Lost Empire. Now, this is a character that takes the stereotype to the extreme. It states on his Disney wiki page that he likes being dirty, to the point that when he is shown a bar of soap, he physically recoils. However, we know that this is probably not a very human thing to do, and this character was mostly played for jokes. So, yeah, I'd say that so far this stereotype is pretty inaccurately portrayed. However, this doesn't mean that the French aren't dirty at all. Let's take a look at this study that was made in 2015, where the results show that France was the 50th country out of 63 when it came to having good hygiene. Another similar survey was conducted in early 2020, and the results show that about a quarter of French people don't actually wash their hands after going to the bathroom, and about half of them don't do it before eating meals. So yes, while the mole was portrayed as the extreme when it comes to being dirty, and I don't think that any normal human being would recoil at the sight of soap, it is true that the French aren't the cleanest people in the world. So maybe these stereotypes are actually more grounded than we thought, even if they are inaccurately portrayed in media. Next up is the Onion Johnny, or as I like to call it, Jean-Claude from Minions: The Rise of Gru. Now, this is probably what most of you picture when you think of a Frenchman. But what if I told you that this actually originated from the UK? Apparently, this was used by the British to refer to itinerant sellers from Brittany that would travel around England and Wales on a bicycle selling onions. These businessmen were at their peak in the 1920s. However, business quickly slowed down in 1929 when the Great Depression started, as the pound lost a lot of value very quickly. Naturally, the number of Onion Johnnies kept declining through World War II, where onions now had to be exported via a single company, meaning that the onion business was probably past its prime. Which is why, by the end of the 20th century, the Onion Johnnies followed the path of the dinosaurs and went completely extinct. But why did they become the face of France when they were just itinerant onion sellers? That's because for a while, especially in the UK, this was the only contact between the British and the French. As you know, casual tourism happened a lot less often back then. So yeah, it's understandable that some people have grown accustomed to seeing the French this way. Now, I mentioned earlier that these types of sellers are completely extinct. They don't exist anymore, and the Onion Johnny business has just run out. However, there exists a city in France that has a Onion Johnny museum and a 2-day festival everywhere to celebrate this kind of culture. So I'd say that some parts of France don't mind being associated with the stereotype, no matter how exaggerated it is in some media. So while yes, at some point in time, this stereotype was an accurate depiction of French, or some parts of French culture, it really is outdated, and a lot of people don't even know what Onion Johnnies are, so that's that. Now let's move on to probably the most subjective stereotype on this list. The fact that the French are very romantic. I'm saying this is subjective because everyone has different views on romances, and something that might appeal to you might not appeal to someone else. Now, for this stereotype, I looked at travel blogs and articles to see what made the French so romantic. And take note that a lot of these articles mostly talk about Paris, because that's something important that I'll get onto later. Now let's take a look at why France is the most romantic country on earth from the Globe Diary, which from what I can gather is a travel blog. Now by France, this article mostly talks about the Île-de-France region, where Paris and Versailles are located. Now according to this article, France is a place where sensual erotic love is expressed a lot more than in other countries, and in a healthy way too. I mean, I guess it makes sense, considering, you know, France has a whole kiss named after the country. Now, it's true that French culture has this notion of spending quality time together, especially over a meal, which is probably why when you picture romance in Paris, you probably think of two people enjoying each other's presence in a cafe. And while they may not be eating frog legs and lobsters, they still are French, trust me. Next, the article talks about how Paris is a beautiful city with a lot of art and meals made by passionate chefs, which, yeah, that's decently accurate. However, I'll go into a bit more detail about the restaurant experience later. It then mentions historic visits like the Versailles Palace, which doesn't really do much for romance. However, learning about history can be romantic apparently. And finally, it talks about how in France you can live like you're in a movie, going out drunks in the streets at 4 a.m. for example. So if that's romantic for you, then yeah, go to France. I've never personally seen anyone do this, but then again, I don't really go out at 4 a.m. However, friends and family members have seen it happen, so if you want to do that and be slightly less judged for it, then yeah, go to Paris. This article presents some good points on romance in France, and while it doesn't actually talk about how the French are more romantic than any other kind of people, which once again makes sense because romance is very subjective. If you want to try a quick litmus test to see if you like French people, just watch Meet the Spy from Team Fortress 2. Now, the previous Stereotypes article really presented Paris, which may not be the most accurate depiction of French people. When you go to France, you shouldn't expect to have high fashion shops, smokers, or rude waiters everywhere. A lot of media presents Parisian culture as French culture, and for good reason. Nobody really visits the French countryside. And while yes, you could argue that some articles and movies present other French cities, but what are those cities? Monaco, Nice, Marseille? All these big cities have people that have similar mindsets to Paris's, even if they hate each other. Let's take a closer look at the rude waiter stereotype. Now, something you may not know about French culture is that they don't really respect authorities or anyone who has a higher social status than them, which is presented in the constant riots, or hell, just look at the French Revolution. So when you go there as a tourist loaded with cash ready to spend on expensive tours or really pricey ice cream, you're probably going to be looked at negatively on your next visit of the capital. However, this doesn't only apply to Parisians. Other French people think this way too. However, tourists just associate it with Paris because it's the only place they visit in France. And if you still can't think of how these waiters behave, think of Lafayette from Hamilton, who constantly makes remarks against royalty and really seems to dislike anyone that has a higher social status than him. So now that we know that all of these stereotypes were somewhat grounded, even if some of them are outdated or just represent a minority called the Parisians, this segues nicely into my next segment, which is about the representation of Paris itself. Now, we all know Paris as a place with the Eiffel Tower, the Arc of Triumph, Notre Dame. It's also home to a certain demographic of people, according to Jay-Z and Kanye. However, is the city of Paris truly a perfect honeymoon destination, filled with exciting romantic experiences, or is it only just a facade falsely advertised in a lot of media? Let's try to figure that out using everyone's favorite type of cinematic masterpieces, perfume ads. Some perfume companies exclusively film in Paris, or places that at least look like Paris. So today I want to talk about this Yves Saint Laurent ad, which takes place in, well, Paris. So in this ad, you can see a sunrise on the beautiful Paris skyline, if you can even call it that. The Seine River looks clean, the sky isn't polluted, and overall it's really appealing to the eyes. And if you're skeptical because this is a perfume ad, meaning that everything looks more beautiful in a perfume ad. Well, you're right, but you can bet that someone has definitely been fooled by this and has wanted to go to Paris because of this ad. And if you don't believe me, just remember that some people still think that the earth is flat. So the abundant number of perfume ads that take place in Paris probably have made people want to go to Paris. However, if that's still not enough reason for you, take a look at this Mario Kart race. I know this isn't very good evidence to back up my arguments, however, the points I'm trying to make here apply to Mario Kart. Now, the race Paris Promenade was added this year to Mario Kart 8, and it presents Paris as this beautiful city with pink skies, for some reason, and large clean streets, cafes scattered everywhere. Very typical Parisian architecture. Is this accurate? Yeah, to some extent, I guess. Even if the clean is very debatable, but people don't really need to know that. So after being indoctrinated with visions of a perfect Paris, tourists from all around the world take a plane and start arriving in the city of Paris. They are met with disappointment. The tourists start to stress out. Their palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy, there's vomit on their suitcases already, plain spaghetti. This is the phenomenon known as Paris syndrome, a condition where tourists, especially from Eastern Asian countries, express an extreme case of cultural shock, as Paris isn't what they expected it to be. It's not a perfectly clean city because, let's face it, it seems unachievable for the French at this point. And this is what shocks the foreigners. Large rats are running around everywhere, the waiters aren't as nice as they expected them to be, and the Eiffel Tower feels like a glorified Disney World ride. So yes, while it's nice for France that it can attract tourism through these ads and representation in media, not everyone benefits from it. Some people start to dislike France because of it. And this weird love-hate relationship between France and everyone else, well, it's something that has manifested onto the internet recently. This is probably the part most of you are familiar with, the internet's views on France. If you've had access to TikTok or YouTube in recent years, you'd have probably known of the trend where people put phrases into Google Translate it into French, only for it to sound really weird. Like that une mur 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 mur.
A ripe blackberry murmurs to the wall. Une mur 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 mur.
And that's basically what a lot of people imagine when they think of the French language. Well, that and fuck oh bonheur. But yeah, at this point, the language can be seen as a joke, like that Amogus language. While you imagine that French people are probably offended by these kinds of memes, I think that if they were, it'd be pretty hypocritical, because French people tend to make fun of the people that speak French in Belgium or Quebec because they have really weird accents, and I will not try to replicate that French because I don't want to be cancelled. However, there are two sides to this argument. One is the side where the people just like to shit on the French language, because yes, I agree that it does sound stupid at some points. And then on the other side, you've got people that really like listening to the French language. A little too much, maybe. And I can tell you that this does not work. Don't try to learn French only because you want to seduce people. I can guarantee that you will regret it. There's also the meme of French people surrendering a lot, which has been around since the Franco-Prussian War, but has only been amplified with how easy it is to get info across the internet. Is it accurate? I guess that France doesn't have a good recent track record when it comes to wars, but make of it what you want. Then there's that period on the internet where everyone was slandering every single country, and it wasn't exclusive to France, so I'm not really going to talk about it. Honorable mentions / my favorite meme about France is just adding le ou lat in front of everything, with le fiche being my favorite and le manque being second. And it's all even better with the accordion playing in the background, because all French people definitely know how to play the accordion. However, my advice for the people watching at home is that if they want to associate the accordion with anyone, don't associate it with the French. Associate it with Weird Al Yankovic, because he totally invented the accordion. And while some of these memes may be racist or offensive and have some really weird comments attached to them, I think that they're posted ironically, and the people who post them don't really believe what they claim in these memes. Unless they do, in which case I have to do research on shitposting once again. And with that, I think I've covered all the points I wanted to for this video. In conclusion, most of what we see about France is either really over-exaggerated or it only represents a small part of what France has to offer. While some of the representation for the French is played for laughs or doesn't really shine them in a very positive light, that doesn't mean that everything you see online is true, because as you saw today, some stereotypes are just completely irrelevant nowadays, and for the portrayals that show France in a positive light, you shouldn't completely believe them either. You can still like France, I'm not telling you not to like it, but you shouldn't put it on a pedestal and think that it's the best place in the world, because like everywhere else in this imperfect world, there are a lot of flaws. So while France's portrayal in media is somewhat grounded in reality, it is not accurate at all. If you're still here, thank you for watching. This video took a longer time to make than usual because I wanted to make a slightly more structured video than usual. Don't take it too seriously though, and if you enjoyed the content, like and subscribe. I don't know when the next video might come out because school starts again soon, so I might refrain from making longer videos. However, I'll try to make content when I'm able to, so if you want to take that gamble, subscribe. That's it. Good night. Peace.